I realized something strange about myself while standing in line at a grocery store. The woman in front of me wasn't speaking to anyone. The man behind me wasn't either. Everyone seemed quietly occupied with their own thoughts. But inside my head, I was in the middle of an argument that wasn't even real. I was explaining myself to someone who wasn't there, defending a decision nobody had questioned, and replaying a conversation that had never happened. And the strangest part? It felt completely normal. For years, I thought I was the only person doing this. Then I discovered something that changed the way I understood my own mind. It started during a period of my life that looked perfectly ordinary from the outside. I had a steady job, a small apartment, and a routine that rarely changed. Every morning I drove the same route to work. I stopped at the same coffee shop. I greeted the same people. Nothing seemed unusual. But there was something happening beneath the surface. Whenever I was alone, driving, showering, walking, lying in bed, my mind would start creating conversations. Sometimes I imagined talking to my boss. Sometimes an old friend. Sometimes someone I hadn't seen in years. The topics changed constantly. In my head, I explained things better than I ever could in real life. I won arguments. I delivered perfect comebacks. I finally said things I wished I had said months ago. At first, I barely noticed it. It felt harmless. Almost everyone daydreams. Almost everyone replays memories. So I assumed it was just another normal habit. But over time, I began noticing a pattern. Many of these conversations weren't about the past. They were about situations that hadn't happened yet. Before meetings, I would mentally rehearse every possible outcome. Before calling someone, I would imagine 10 different versions of the conversation. Before making a decision, I would spend hours debating invisible people in my head. And strangely, the more important something felt, the more conversations appeared. One afternoon, a coworker asked a simple question during a meeting. Nothing confrontational. Nothing serious. Yet later that evening, I replayed the interaction for almost an hour. I imagined what I should have said. I imagined what she might have been thinking. I imagined follow-up conversations that never took place. By bedtime, I had mentally expanded a 30-second exchange into an entire story. That's when I started feeling uncomfortable. Not because the conversations existed. Because I couldn't understand why they existed. What exactly was my mind trying to accomplish? Weeks passed. The question stayed with me. Then one day, I experienced something that made me pay closer attention. I was walking through a park after work when I noticed an elderly man sitting alone on a bench. As I passed, I overheard part of a conversation. At least, I thought I did. Then I realized he wasn't speaking to anyone. He was quietly talking to himself. Not loudly. Not in a concerning way. Just softly, almost thoughtfully. For some reason, it caught my attention. And it made me wonder. Maybe humans are having conversations all the time. Maybe some happen out loud. Maybe most happen silently. That thought stayed with me. So I began observing my own mind more carefully. Instead of immediately getting lost in these imaginary discussions, I started asking questions. Who was I talking to? What was I trying to solve? What emotion showed up before the conversation started? The answers surprised me. Many conversations appeared after moments of uncertainty. Others appeared after embarrassment. Some showed up when I felt misunderstood. And many happened when I was trying to predict the future. Little by little, I noticed something important. The conversations themselves weren't the real story. The emotions underneath them were. One evening, I remembered an argument from years earlier. Someone had criticized a decision I made. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself it didn't matter. Yet years later, my mind was still creating imaginary conversations about it. Why? Because a part of me had never fully processed how it felt. The conversation wasn't about winning an argument. It was about seeking resolution. That realization hit harder than I expected. I had spent years believing these mental conversations were random. They weren't. They were clues. Signals. Attempts by my mind to work through experiences that felt unfinished. The more I paid attention, the clearer the pattern became. Whenever I felt uncertain, my brain simulated conversations. Whenever I felt anxious, it rehearsed possibilities. Whenever I felt hurt, it revisited old exchanges. And whenever I faced a difficult decision, it invited imaginary voices into the discussion. In a strange way, my mind was acting like a committee. Different parts of me were presenting different perspectives. One voice worried about failure. Another focused on safety. Another wanted approval. Another wanted freedom. I wasn't talking to other people. I was often talking to different parts of myself. That idea changed everything. Because suddenly, the conversations stopped feeling irrational. They started feeling human. Think about it. Human beings are social creatures. We learn through interaction. We grow through dialogue. We understand ourselves through relationships. So when nobody else is around, the brain often creates its own version of dialogue. Not because something is wrong. Because conversation is one of the ways humans think. But there was another layer I hadn't noticed before. Not all imaginary conversations are helpful. Some move us forward. Others keep us stuck. I discovered this while replaying an interaction with a friend. For weeks, I kept imagining what I should have said. Every version ended differently. Every version felt slightly better. Yet none of them changed reality. The conversation had already happened. The relationship was already moving forward. Only my mind remained trapped in the past. That's when I recognized an important distinction. Some imaginary conversations are about understanding. Others are about control. Understanding helps us process emotions. Control makes us believe we can rewrite events that already happened. One creates insight. The other creates exhaustion. And once I saw that difference, I started noticing it everywhere. Whenever I felt peaceful after a mental conversation, it usually meant I had learned something. Whenever I felt drained, it usually meant I was trying to control something uncontrollable. That awareness changed my daily life more than I expected. I stopped judging myself every time my mind created a conversation. Instead, I became curious. What is this conversation trying to tell me? What feeling exists underneath it? What fear is asking for attention? Sometimes the answer was obvious. Sometimes it wasn't. But simply asking the question created space between me and the thought. For the first time, I wasn't automatically getting pulled into every imaginary discussion. I was observing it. Learning from it. Understanding it. Then came the realization that changed my perspective the most. Many of the conversations I imagined were centered around one assumption. I believed other people were thinking about me far more than they actually were. I imagined their judgments, their opinions, their reactions, their criticisms. Yet when I honestly reflected on my own life, I realized something. Most of my mental energy was focused on my own concerns, my own insecurities, my own goals. And if that was true for me, it was probably true for everyone else. The people I spent hours imagining were often busy imagining themselves. That realization felt oddly freeing. Not because nobody cared, but because nobody was analyzing my mistakes as intensely as I was. Many of the conversations in my head existed because I was carrying assumptions that weren't necessarily true. And once those assumptions loosened, many of the conversations lost their power. I still have imaginary conversations. Probably more than I'd like to admit. Sometimes during long drives. Sometimes before important decisions. Sometimes while lying awake at night. But now I see them differently. They're not evidence that something is wrong. They're evidence that the mind is trying to understand itself. The key isn't eliminating them. The key is listening carefully enough to hear what they're actually about. Because beneath every imaginary conversation is usually something deeper. A fear. A hope. A regret. A question. A need for understanding. And when we recognize that, something interesting happens. The conversation becomes less important than the insight it reveals. Looking back, I think the biggest lesson wasn't about psychology at all. It was about empathy. Not just for other people. For ourselves. We spend so much time criticizing our thoughts. Fighting our minds. Trying to force ourselves to think differently. But sometimes the mind isn't creating problems. It's trying to solve them. Sometimes those imaginary conversations aren't distractions. They're unfinished emotions looking for a voice. And maybe that's why so many of us have them. Not because we're broken. Not because we're strange. But because we're human. We are constantly trying to understand our experiences, our decisions, and our place in the world. And sometimes the mind does that through conversation, even when nobody else is in the room. Now, whenever I catch myself speaking to an imaginary audience inside my head, I don't immediately push it away. I pause for a moment. Not to continue the conversation, but to understand why it started. Because hidden inside that dialogue is usually a truth I haven't fully noticed yet. And maybe that's the real question. The next time you find yourself having a conversation with someone who isn't there, are you actually talking to them? Or is your mind trying to tell you something about yourself?